Why have you become so notorious? What is your, ultimately, what is your goal? What is the point of Dr. Jordan Peterson? What do you hope to achieve through what is now huge global fame?
The students had two comments usually. They said, it's very difficult for me to talk to anyone else about what I'm learning in this class because it's so different, and also that it changed the way I looked at everything. So there's no shortage of challenge. Everyone wants an optimal challenge. You know, that's in the nature of play, to have an optimal challenge.
Why have you become so notorious?
I decided a long time ago, and really a long time ago, that I was going to say what I thought, and sort of independent of the outcome. You know, often people craft their speech. You know, I could have come here on your show, for example, I spent half an hour thinking, well, what do I want out of this show? But I don't think like that.
Ultimately, what is your goal? What is the point of Dr. Jordan Peterson? What do you hope to achieve through what is now huge global fame?
I hope to encourage people. Other than that, I want to see what happens. You know, I want to say what I believe to be true as clearly and carefully as I possibly can, and I want to see what happens as a consequence. And what people don't understand about that, in some sense, is your happiness. The purpose of your life is not going to be happiness. Sometimes it is. Sometimes that will come, but there will be difficult periods in your life, and happiness won't suffice then. But what you can have in your life is an adventure. You can have an adventure, and the truth is the best adventure. There's no doubt about that, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is, you don't know what's going to happen if you say what you think. Now, I don't mean incautiously, and I don't mean provocatively or any more than necessary. You don't know what's going to happen, so that's very adventurous. But also, if it's you and your voice, then it's your adventure. And if it isn't, like if you're crafting your speech or manipulating in any way, or parroting or abiding by the dictates of the crowd, then I don't know whose adventure you're having, but it's not yours. So one of the things people don't understand is that ability of the other person to oppose or rein in or satirize or dance with or joke or play with, all of those things, they're also what keeps you together and sane, because we all have a tendency to drift in our weakest place, let's say. And so some people become alcoholic, and some people will become narcissistic, and so on. We all have our temptations. And one of the ways we buttress ourselves against that is by having other people say, no, you're not funny, there you're boring, there you need to be reined in. And if you deprive yourself of that, that's what happens to hyper celebrities and dictators. They deprive themselves of that social regulation because they forbid it, and then they're in hell. And sometimes they drag everyone along with them too. So the fascists are more straightforward about it, because they basically come out and say something like, shut up or we'll beat you.
Right.
Whereas the compassionate types, who are narcissistic compassionate types, they come out and say, well, we're really trying to save the world, you know, and we're acting in everyone's best interest, and we think it would be better if you should just, you know, regulate what you say. Because if you don't, you're not a good person. I'd take the fascist bully over the compassionate narcissist anytime. They're way more straightforward. Well, kindness is tricky, you know, because one of the things you deal with very commonly if you're a clinical psychologist, apart from depression and anxiety, is, well, behavior therapists offer assertiveness training. And now, the people who need assertiveness training are often people who are too agreeable, compassionate, polite by temperament. Now, the problem with that is that they let people walk all over them because they don't stand up enough for themselves. And the consequence of that is they get resentful, and then they get bitter, and then they get conniving, and then they'll mob. They'll do anything for everyone else, but they push themselves beyond their limits, and then they won't even recognize the limits because they feel, well, if I'm not doing everything for you, then I'm not a good person. It's like, no, a good person does a little for you. Like if I'm acting properly with you, say in this conversation, there's something in it for you, and there's something in it for me, right? And we want that to be reciprocal. And so the cost of me bending too far in your direction is that I'll become bitter and resentful and conniving. And resentment is an unbelievably toxic state of being. One of the things that's been painful about what I've been doing with my wife as we've traveled around the world for the last number of years is to see how desperate people are for an encouraging word. Life is brutally difficult and sometimes unbearably brutally difficult. And you can see the progressives playing with that notion. It's warped into this sense of victimization, but it does reflect some understanding of the underlying tragic reality of life. And so it's good to get that right out on the table to begin with. Say, well, you're miserable, you have your reasons, and they might be deep reasons. But if you let the misery demoralize you and make you bitter and cynical and cowardly and make you withdraw, then first of all, that's a failure in the highest sense on your part, and all it's going to do is make everything worse. Then you might think, well, what do you have to respond to that? How do you respond to that catastrophe and challenge? And the answer is, and this is what Rocky is telling his son in no uncertain terms, is like, terrible as things are, there's a lot more to you than you can possibly imagine. And that if you face those things forthrightly and with some faith and courage, then you can have the adventure of your life and prevail even over catastrophe.
But if you've got an ambition and you're on the fence about your own ambition, how the hell can you expect anyone to invest in what you're doing? Because you're not even serious about it. So stop reading motivational books, stop fucking